Welcome to our weekly cybersecurity article review in 30 minutes. And in these reviews, we as cybersecurity professionals are definitely passionate as it relates to discussing and sharing our analysis and our views and providing the community with various insights and the current affairs, the current happenings affecting our lives within the environment on a daily basis. And definitely, these are definitely situations that affect various businesses, organizations of all types. And of such, we definitely enjoy having these discussions where we can actually add value to the community. And for sure, please feel free to ask questions, to interact with us as we go along. And in today's conversations, as it relates to our article, we're going to be looking at a recent cyber attack affecting Mountain View and Idaho Falls community hospitals. And for many of you who are actually following the happenings within our environment or the news, various podcast happenings, then for sure this might be one of those um, incidents that you're actually familiar with. So we have Chris Carter, Jonathan Fisher, and Paul Robinson joining to provide your analysis of this incident. So, guys, as always, nice having you join in to provide your expertise in these conversations.
Great to be here, Richie, as always. I really look forward to the early Thursday mornings Central Time conversations. I think some of the topics that we're talking about are very relevant, and as you kind of alluded to, the fact that Mountain View Hospital in Idaho and their clinics have been affected by a cyber attack, which has led to a number of disruption in services. I think the hospital has taken their systems offline. They've notified law enforcement and they've launched an investigation, of which we have very little details. We know that the emergency room remains open. Patients are able to drive themselves in, but other services, I think, like Medicare and Teton cancer, that's been limited. So I think my heart goes out to the providers, the IT team, the security team, because this is again it just highlights the importance of ensuring that we have critical cybersecurity capabilities in place to avoid or minimize these types of attacks. So really looking forward to the conversation with my colleagues today, and hopefully we can gain some insights, perhaps be inspired by what happened, and think about what we can do to as an industry to minimize these types of attacks, as they it's critical. People's lives are at stake, right? People's livelihood are at stake. um, your life, the quality of life of the providers are, have been disrupted in ways that they never imagined. So, really looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, and that's a very good note to start our conversation on. I mean, this is something that is for me personally. This is getting beyond zeros and ones, bits and bytes technology. When I carefully look at this article, it is reinforcing the fact that regardless of the infrastructures that you have in place, regardless of the technologies that you have in place, regardless of the skill set of persons that you might have in place, the greatest persons are, well, the greatest elements in the mix that is affected when you talk about the technology, the processes. People, the end users, we are the ones, not the technologies being affected, not the processes are being affected. Well, for sure, they're actually finding the vulnerabilities in these processes and technologies. But at the end of the day, we are the ones that are actually being affected by these things. And it makes you wonder what it is that these bad actors are actually thinking at the end of the day in terms of what it is that they're actually doing, the impact of what it is that they're doing. So, guys, can you share or give your take on the article itself in terms of providing your assessment? I mean, Jonathan, would you like to start giving your feedback?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. And this does hit very close to home, as we were talking before this happened, or before we started this, is because I actually live in this community, and so luckily I haven't had to go to the hospitals. My family goes to a small little family practice that's not connected to these hospitals, as far as sharing my data. But to give kind of a scope of what it is, this is about two hospitals out of three big hospitals here in the Idaho Falls region. So the other one, hasn't been affected so far. But I mean, the cyber attack pretty much took out, 2/3 of like the community care, for where people would go for more of the public assistance for their care, emergency rooms, thinking of going real fast. I was talking to a coworker yesterday, and a little more backstory on this, because there isn't any much information that's provided. We don't know the scope of the attack. When you go to I've done a little bit more digging into this, just because of how close it is to home. The hospital website itself, still after about 10 days or 11 days since the attack happened, they still don't know the scope of the work. They're working around the clock to really try to figure it out, but all the systems are offline. One of my coworkers has a sister that's a doctor there, and pretty much was telling me yesterday that all the doctors had to go back into manually putting in the information on paper and submitting that, to be filed. So we're talking probably practices that haven't been around for 20, maybe 30 years or so, right? So when you think about some of these doctors who've never grown up having to do paper, and put their notes down on that, and having to learn a new process, that is definitely slowing down the work that they're able to provide, the services that they're able to do. So it's really limited the how much patients can be seen. Um, so if you think, if there's like a pretty bad natural disaster, or something that happened where there need to be like a mass emergency, it's now affecting the whole region in the care that this community can receive through this. So it's kind of showing me, that these attacks aren't something that's just kind of somewhere else in the world that doesn't affect your community. And so, a lot of people kind of see it that way. It's not nothing happening to them, so we don't need to pay attention to it. But the moment it kind of hits close to home or at home, that's when it's too late to really start thinking about how are you taking care of your data. How are these organizations, maintaining the data for people that trust them to take care of their data. I mean, we're talking about, PHI, some very sensitive information there to understand what goes on. If someone can get in there and manipulate the data, that's people's lives that could be at stake. Wrong dosage, wrong type of treatments. That there's some serious consequences that could go along with that.
Yeah,
I think
Paul.
you're on
Yeah.
mute.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, very important points there, Jonathan. Paul, would you like to give your feedback?
You're on mute now, Paul. You're double muted. There you go. No, we can't hear you.
Uh, so there's those technology at times.
How about now?
We can
Good.
hear you now. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll fix this later. So a couple of things that were brought up that I wanted to highlight. So, Jonathan talks about how, this personally impacts him. About 7 years ago, I was involved in a level one health system ransomware attack. And again, we don't know if this is a ransomware attack or not, but a cyber attack that took place. And it's the human aspect that is very, very hard to deal with when you see it, when you touch it, seeing, Jonathan talked about round the clock. I've seen army cots set up in data centers because network engineers had to work 12, 18-hour shifts to make sure that the basic services weren't going out. The doctors and the nurses are angry about it, not because necessarily you have to go back to pen and paper. They're mad about that, but what they're mad about is when you experience something like this, you understand it's a life or death situation. And these are people that have went to school and dedicated their lives for patient care and keeping people alive. So when these situations arise and patient care is really truly at stake, it makes them angry and upset. And there's a mental piece to it that impacts people that are directly involved trying to get to this. You're exhausted, you're tired, you're frustrated, you're angry, you're scared. HIPAA, OCR, HHS has a rule. If you're deemed negligent with data and that vulnerability is exposed, that could force litigation on you. We make like, oh, what keeps the CISO up late at night? And I hate saying that because A, it's not true. CISOs end up going to sleep at night at some point. But B, it's kind of trivializing the issues that they have, because that is a concern. You can face litigation from an attack like this. So um, I'm interested to see how this conversation develops, but I wanted to kind of take. I usually, if you listen to this enough, that I kind of take the winding road to get to where we're going, but really want to focus in on the human aspect of it and the impact that it's having on these people that have to recover from this situation.
Exactly. Um, so, so Chris, would you like to give further insights as well?
Yeah, and I mean, I continue to think about like what can we do better as an industry, right? For example, in the kinetic world, we have FEMA. We have, if there's a disaster, the president just declares like a state of emergency for this particular region, and help goes in. When you talk about critical care and people's lives at stake, I think from in the cybersecurity industry, that's something we should probably think about. What can we do, right, to improve cybersecurity measures to prevent similar incidents in the future, or at least at the very minimum, minimize the attack, right? Um, Jonathan mentioned yeah, he lives in that community, but if like a mini pandemic, God forbid it doesn't happen, were to occur in that community, what would that look like for people who depend on these critical services to get them back to where they need to be? So I think it's something that we as an industry should probably take a step back and look at, because everything you touch today has a cyber component, which means we have to embed ourselves in the right in the not the infrastructure, but right, yeah, the infrastructure of how society functions. And I think that's where we should probably start focusing. Obviously, right? This is a medical incident. But if we were to triage, right, we say, okay, we go, we triage, we get the hospital back up to where they need to be. The next stage would be what do we do to prevent these types of things from happening? And how do we continually mature as an industry to provide not only support, but to provide intelligence, awareness, and education about what hospitals can do, cybersecurity professionals can do to be more resilient. Right. That's one of I know Paul's favorite word is resilience. How do we focus on resilience, not just as at the company level, but at the industry level?
Mm.
Yeah, that's a very important point you have actually made there. As I look at this article, thinking about all that have been said, the question that comes to mind is, are the IT and cybersecurity teams getting the support and attention they deserve? That's the big question. Based on the articles that I'm looking at, both the articles, do you think that the technical guys, the cybersecurity team, do you think that these guys are actually getting the level of support that they actually need based on these reports that we constantly read from time to time? And whether or
Well,
not
now,
the
yeah. Well, now
um,
they are. Now they are. You know, and I say that kind of snarkily. But that's the problem. That's the problem that we have, and it's a big disconnect. That we have in a lot of industries, especially of healthcare, is how does IT and cybersecurity articulate to the business the risk? So if you're in the boardroom and you're like, well, I have to buy tool X or we have to do service Y, the board and executive teams look at it as a cost center. But if you go in and you say, if we don't, and I'm just going to throw this out there as an example, if we don't do a penetration test on our environment and don't know the known threats and vulnerabilities in our network, and we don't do that, and that's exploited, we can kill people. Then the executives and the board level respond to that. So I think that's the disconnect, and I think that's the responsibility we have as cybersecurity professionals, the four of us on here, and the thousands, hundreds of thousands that are out there, is getting IT and cybersecurity and risk teams and coaching them along the way and how to get the message out there to talk about the severity of it, and to get board levels and executive levels to understand it. Like, boards and executives aren't stupid. They're smart for a reason, but they only have finite, limited knowledge on what it is that they're concerned about. That's why they hired us. That's why we're there. Our job is to get that message to them in a language and in a format understandable to say, oh wow, people could die on our watch because we're not taking basic controls or having basic plans of resiliency when it comes to a cyber attack.
yeah, that's a very valid point you have actually made. But for some reason, I think that the one of the challenges I see based on experience is that, as you have rightly said, the board executive today they are actually becoming more aware of the importance of actually taking that time, the initiative to understand cybersecurity, the role that cybersecurity plays within their organizations. But I think there is still a delay, or there is a somewhat what's the best word to possibly, maybe, that's acceptance of the fact that they need to really support the initiatives, the approvals of the necessary budgets, the approval of the necessary resources. Because so often we see it whereby they have persons on the board who are aware of what is happening and what could potentially happen to the organization. But bearing in mind that they are the ones that actually make the final decision in terms of what level of risk is accepted for, in terms of the risk appetite for the organization. So IT cybersecurity team might come together with the best proposals in terms of communicating, but they might not see the urgency, because the fact is that this has not happened to us, and we continuously hear this happening. This has not happened to us, or this is not going to happen to us. This is for X company or Y company. So how do we really get the importance of actually having the resources in place, having the plan in place, being on board with us as the cybersecurity team, the technical guys, to work along together in that unison, so that we can actually have that level of resiliency that is required. Because the fact is that there are going to be incidents, and I'm not talking about incidents, but it's the ability to um, deal with, recover from, quickly detect, have the resources in place that actually makes the difference. So that's my take.
Yeah, I remember one of my coaching sessions, one of my coaches, he was saying, the importance of communication should never be underestimated. And he gave me a scenario. He said, tell me a story about this, right? So you're a general, and he walked me through the process. He was like, you're a general, you have to motivate your troops to go up a hill, to conquer like another, kind of like demolish the opposing army and take over take over that territory, right? And he was like, so I said, well, this is what I do, and I would say, hey, we have to get going. And he looked at me and he shook his head and he said, how about you just say we came, we saw, we conquer. Let's go do it, right? I think the point I'm trying to make is I think as security professionals, when we go in front of the board or we go in front of the executives, we have to be very short, we have to be concise, we have to be relevant, and we have to deliver an effective message because that's where it all starts. As Paul said, just picking up on his point earlier, is you go into the boardroom and they have no understanding of what you're saying, or you're talking to an executive. They're busy people trying to run a business and they're worried about the bottom line, right? Security is a cost center. We need to change that paradigm. And we do that by effectively communicating our message. That's one. First, we have to demonstrate, and we have to demonstrate that we're capable and earn, right, currency. And we do part of doing that is effectively selling cybersecurity. You have to be able to as a security leader, you have to be able to effectively communicate um, to the relevant stakeholders, speak to them in a language they understand. And I think that's a first step in terms of getting the budget, right? But not only is it for the executives to understand, but it's the cybersecurity professionals that need to do a good job in telling a story and bringing our stakeholders along, right, in that story. And it's an evolutionary story, right, where you're consistently keeping them abreast, making them aware, making it relevant, and taking them along, right, that story. Jonathan, I know I jumped in front of you. Go ahead.
No, that's fine, Chris. I mean, all great points, and just trying to add on to that is, if the security leaders can't effectively tell them, the board members, the presidents, the directors, how a cybersecurity incident could overall affect the impact of the business, they're never going to have that good buy-in, right? I mean, a cybersecurity professional can go and say, hey, if we get attacked, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. But if they just keep it in the realm of cybersecurity and not really relate it to what the business is, if they come in and more effectively, as you were saying, Chris, can explain that, hey, if we have this attack happen, what's going to happen is we're going to have to shut down these systems. What's there going to be a result of that? Our doctors are not going to be able to get to their notes. They're not going to be able to, quickly research what's going on with that patient. If there's no backup, there is no information. So, let's start also with, let's make sure that there's some backup. So if there is an incident, we at least have, a redundancy system that we can, use for emergency systems just to keep moving forward, right? As we said, there's not a lot of information in this. I've been checking on this quite a bit just because of, how close it is to home and how I know, friends and people that I know around this community are being affected by this. And they don't even know the extent of how much of their data has been breached. What are the bad actors doing with it? What have they taken? So until those professionals, cybersecurity professionals, are able to more effectively talk to the decision makers, they're not going to get the support that they need. As Paul jokingly said earlier, they probably have the support now, with the FBI or whatever law enforcement agencies are there helping. But still, when we look at the articles and kind of the updates that the hospital is giving, they still don't know. 11 days afterwards, they're still trying to figure out what the scope is, kind of what the attack vector was. and what's causing the issues. Um, so I think it comes down to, as the cybersecurity professionals, we need to better understand how to communicate. And what does that mean? We got to get out of our little cubicles, out of our rooms, out of our little, comfort spots, and go have those conversations, even if it's just to start building relationships with, the directors, the board of, the board of directors, the presidents, those who are running the hospitals. Start to get to know them, make it so that way when they see you coming, it's not just a cybersecurity incident or, oh, hey, there's that cyber guy, let me just listen to him, blow him off a little bit so I can get back to focusing on running the hospital and, providing care. Right. We need to be able to do better at building those relationships so we can frankly come up, have those good conversations, be able to help them understand that if we come to them with a problem or something that we're suspecting, that we can then, know that they understand us, they trust us already, and we can have a more effective conversation about ways to go forward to protect the data.
That's a very
Yeah,
important point. Uh,
Patrick raised a good.
okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna highlight the, Patrick is saying basically, does this mean that the purple team needs to also work with the GRC analysts in making sure the security posture of the organization is up to date, right? Since they mediate between the red and blue teams. I think, Patrick, you're hitting on a. I agree with you 100%. What I would also add, what most mature cybersecurity organizations are doing now is they have sort of a fusion center mentality, right? So when I saw this, I immediately went back and thought about 9/11, right? This is the point you're hitting on, Patrick, and I'm going to drill into it a little bit. 9/11, when they did in the final analysis, they figured that the FBI wasn't talking to the CIA. People were operating in silos, so all the intelligence agency weren't communicating effectively. And I think what you're seeing now in a lot of mature organizations is not only is GRC talking to Purple Team, the threat intel team is talking to the vulnerability management team, and they're correlating data and they're using all of that, right? So everybody is on the same page. So not only, right, are the GRC and the purple and red and blue teams are talking together, but the fusion of all the different capabilities are communicating, and they're communicating in such a way that you get threat intel. What does that mean? Do we need to update our vulnerability management? Does that mean we need to strengthen our GRC policies? Does that mean that we need to put our threat defense organization on, right? So all of these components are talking together. So Patrick, I think you're hitting on a very salient topic. We only have 2 minutes, so I'll shut up and give my fellow panelists an opportunity to chime in.
Yeah, Chris, what I would touch on top of that is it kind of goes in line with what we were talking about as far as the communication style of this. So GRC, very business minded, very audit focused, red, purple, blue teams, very technical, very binary, very zeros and ones. So classic example I just thought of right here is pen testing team finds that the EMR system of a healthcare entity hasn't been patched for 180 days. They give that information to GRC. Executives and boards see, okay, it hasn't been patched for 180 days. Go patch it. So what? The pen testing team needs to have that ability to say, okay, for 180 days, we have been vulnerable to where our electronic medical record system could have been taken down. It could be infiltrated at this point because it hasn't been patched. If this is patched, then our doctors and nurses do not have access to electronic medical records, thus putting lives in danger. So that's the whole thing. And again, bringing it back to cybersecurity professionals, technical people, that's not their strong suit, which is okay. That's fine. I'm not a uber technical guy, but I need someone from a technical perspective to be able to help me to articulate a message to technical people. We have to be as security professionals and say, okay, let's normalize this data, let's make it applicable to the business, so the findings that we have inside of pen tests the business knows the risk that we're running.
That's a very excellent point to note on. And just to add to all of the discussion is the fact that, and this is something that you guys have actually mentioned before, but just to reinforce the point is that many times, even within organizations that I've actually, worked with, if you ask, for example, any employee, what's the goal of the organization? What's the mission of the organization? Who it is that the organization makes money or operates? And in most cases, persons do not really are unable to really provide an answer to these questions, which brings us back to the purpose of why am I actually in the organization? Is it just about my desk, my job function? Do I just work in isolation? So that's a very important point to break down those synergy, those barriers to create that synergy. So when we have everyone working on board, understanding the overall purpose, goal, missions of the organization, then persons are much better able to operate in a way that is more efficient and more secure in terms of actually supporting each other to ensure that we are as resilient to the various attacks that could affect the organizations. So just wanted to add that to this conversation. So guys, there we have it. A very wonderful conversations. And for sure, at all times I always say that the aim is not for us to point fingers, but the aim of this conversation is for us to help organizations to better able to deal with the various incidents that can actually affect our day-to-day lives. So, guys, there you have it in 30 seconds, our weekly cyber article review. Guys, have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.